Oh, I love this computer. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. And I have my good friend here, Matt Tipton. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
How are you?
I'm doing well. So, just to give everyone a little bit of a backstory, Matt is a father. How many children you've got? Three, right?
Three, yes.
And what are their ages?
7, 9, and 11.
And tell us which ages are boys, which are girls.
I got two boys and a girl. The oldest and the youngest are boys, and my middle that runs everything is my daughter.
The girls and girl power all the way. So, Matt has a very extensive background as a U.S Army Ranger and now is an ER doctor. And I wanted to have him come on just to share a little bit about the perspective. I think the veterans' perspective is really important, and just sort of talking about balancing also being an ER doctor and being a father and navigating the many nuances in between. And Matt's been very helpful to me, extremely helpful to me throughout my pregnancy and in having Raven, in imparting lots of different words of wisdom. So I think that, yeah, we'll get a lot out of our chat today. So Matt, tell me a little bit about where you grew up in your own childhood.
I grew up in East Tennessee, and I think I was a little bit poor, but I didn't know that I was poor, which I think is a sign of good parenting. And I think honestly, in the United States, there aren't really poor people, which is a good thing. And that would be an offensive statement to a lot of people, but I want to explain. Our poor people here are obese, which means that there's no starvation. And you've been all over the world, so I know that you've seen that. We've been sheltered from war here since, I guess, the 1860s. There's not been war in the United States. So that's amazing for everybody that's ever been born and raised in America. But no, East Tennessee, it was cool. I didn't have air conditioning until I was like 11, and we didn't have cable, and it wasn't a big deal though. Like, and the public school system in East Tennessee was great. So, awesome. Both my parents had college degrees, and they read to me, and they were very present in my life, and they were great parents. So that was just how it was.
And were you pretty much an outdoors kid? Did you go away and come back when the sun went down? What was your childhood experience?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
What was your childhood experience like? Were you pretty much in the woods all day till it got dark, or what was that
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like?
I was an 80s and early 90s kid and a little bit of a latchkey kid. And I had a BB gun, and I would walk to my friend's house, and we would go out in the woods, and we would shoot doves off the electric wires and then cook them in the toaster and go fishing. It was very laissez-faire parenting, but also there were. So I had free range to walk around the neighborhood and go out in the woods and do whatever I want. But if I was to do anything bad, there was 11 grandmothers that weren't mine that would know exactly where I was and call my mom or somebody who knew me. You couldn't get away with anything because there was, I guess, the village raising us. But we were also largely left to do whatever we wanted to. It was a very safe neighborhood, and it was great.
Oh, I love that. And is that similar? I mean, do you think that they have that freedom now? You're still in East Tennessee, and do they have that freedom that you had, or do you think times have changed?
I'm in West Tennessee, and we live very rural, but I don't know my neighbors as well. And I think electronics has changed childhood. Like, there's a lot of iPad time that did not exist when I was a child. So I think boredom adds a special flavor to childhood where you have to figure out, am I going to count buttons or, go throw sticks in the creek and watch them float? And now kids have an infinite access to every media on the internet with iPads and iPhones and the television. So it's just different. And I don't know that we can go back to where we were then, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And just while we're on that topic, from a medical perspective, what are your thoughts on screen time for children? Do you think there's
Uh,
benefits to it, or do you think it's all bad?
I don't think it's all bad. And I really enjoy when my son asks me a question because I would get some BS answers from my parents when I'm like, what's inside of a volcano? And they're like, lava. And that was the end of it. Or they're like, what do you think? But now I'm like, well, let's pull up a video and we'll sit down and we'll watch an amazing video by Smithsonian scientists that like go through like the hard science of it. And we couldn't do that when, in the 80s and 90s. Now you can. But also, if you ignore your kid for 20 minutes, they can go down a rabbit hole of just skibbity toilet. I don't know if you know what that is, but there's weird stuff on the internet now. And then there's obviously horrible pornography and then mass marketing of, digital BS. So that's bad for your kids. I think there is good, but you have to definitely supervise it really, really well.
Interesting. So let's backtrack a little bit, and I saw your daughter was making a cute cameo in the background. Um, so let's go back a little bit. So when did you join the military, and was that something that you always wanted to do? And yeah, tell us about that journey for you.
So I've thought about it. Do you know who Dana Delaney is?
Yes, I do.
China Beach. That was like my favorite show in eighth grade. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I was a teenager. So September 17th of 1996, I'd been to a year of college. I joined the Army to be a Ranger, and I had always wanted to be a doctor, and I did both. So I was a very unguided youth and just kind of very impulsive of, well, I'll go do this now. So my best friend, while I was in engineering school, was failing and he decided he was going to go join the army and he needed a ride. And while I was there, I was like, well, I'll go be an Army Ranger. And the recruiters were actually shocked, and I signed up and I did that. So very impulsive. Like there wasn't a plan there. I just did it.
And how many years did you spend in the military, and did you deploy?
I did right at 5 weeks. I got in September 17th of 96 and I got out in August 15th of 01, right before 9/11. And I deployed to all sorts of places all over the world. We never did any real combat while I was in. There was a lot of police missions where we went to various places, but it wasn't the global war on terror like it was right after. So
And did you go straight into medical school after that? And how did being a veteran shape your perspective as well in wanting to do medicine, and I guess even now your approach to how you sort of contend to difficult situations, or especially working in emergency rooms?
um, I was in Germany doing training with Third Ranger Battalion, and we had a guy get hurt, and I'd already done some minor medical training. My primary job was infantry, but I'd cross trained in medical. And after that was over, a gentleman named Russ Coatwall, who was our battalion surgeon, kind of mentored me into the medical field. And when I got out, I went to paramedic school, and then I worked as a medic while I got my undergrad degree. And in 2008, I went into medical school in East Tennessee.
Awesome. I'm always curious because I think it's something as women we think about growing up, whether we want to be mums or not. And it's something that you either do or you don't. You have that maternal instinct or you don't. Tell me from your perspective, as a guy, growing up in America, do you have those thoughts of wanting to be a dad or not wanting to be a dad? Did you always know you wanted to be a dad? Is that something you thought about growing up? Is it something you thought about in the military? Or when did it dawn on you that it was something that you wanted?
I can't recall the first time, but it feels like always that it was just understood that I was going to be a dad and a granddad and forever, like down the line. Um, I think I was 11 and my parents sent me to the Red Cross babysitting school, and I started babysitting kids that I grew up with at my own church that were maybe 5 years younger than me. And when I got married, my wife at the time had never changed a diaper when we had our first kid. And I thought that was a really strange thing, but she was the youngest of all her siblings and the youngest of all her cousins. So it just never occurred. The way I grew up, if you were at a family event and there's toddlers and babies, it wasn't uncommon for an adult to hand you a baby and be like, go change this diaper. I mean, it wasn't gross or weird. You just did it. Now, like a really bad poopy diaper, usually the mom or somebody would do, but like a pee diaper, it was just that was part of being 11. You had to go change diapers and take out the trash and mow the lawn and do other chores. Like it was part of communal living. I don't know if was it the same for you in Australia with your family?
Not really. I can definitely relate to your wife in that as much as I'd never been around babies that much growing up. I was sort of the youngest in every scenario, and I went to boarding school, so I didn't really babysit. I think I recall babysitting once for a toddler, when I came back to visit, and I just remember the toddler swearing all the time. His dad obviously swore a lot. And that was my one babysitting experience. And even though when I was traveling as a war reporter, I'd often be in refugee camps or in hospitals, but so I was sort of around babies, but it was never really my job to do the diapers and things like that. So, and I'd moved to America long before my sister started having babies. So I can totally relate to your wife in that the first diaper I changed was that of my daughters. So I was pretty terrified going into motherhood just because everything was so completely new. Um, but Ryan, my partner, because he had younger siblings, he had a lot more experience changing diapers than I had. So it was a little bit of a role reversal similar to your situation.
Um, there's an author, Robert Heinlein. Are you familiar with him?
No, no, I'm
He's
not.
he's science fiction. He said a man, like a complete man or a Renaissance man, should be able to do a lot of things, and it's like con a ship, butcher a hog, plan an invasion, act as a group, act as an inferior, blah blah blah. But he looks like, but one of them is change a diaper and set a bone. And this has always been one of my favorite quotes. I didn't memorize it, but it's being a good father is part of being a good man.
Mm.
And even if you don't have kids of your own, being a good uncle, like, if you're at a family event, uh, it's it's very masculine for somebody to be able to hand you a baby and you be able to deal with that. And I think it's weird when guys act like, oh, that's women's work. No, like it's man's work to be a father or an uncle, and you should be able to do it.
Oh, I do love that. And that reminds me of why there are no changing tables in men's rooms. Because
There are in most places, in my
ah,
opinion.
I don't see it much here. So I hope that's something that I see more of. I'm glad you're seeing it because it is just as much a man's job as it is a woman's. And I hope that more people have the same outlook that you have on that.
Parenting is definitely a team sport, and not just the mother and the father, but the grandparents. And I mean, how often with Raven are you just at a friend's house and the relief when you have to go pee that there's a competent man or woman that can hold her while you go spend 3 minutes to handle your own hygiene. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
it is. I mean, I've even had it where I've walked to a restroom with her in a restaurant or something, and usually, I'm just take her with me, but there'll be somebody there. It's like, no, just give it to me while you go pee. And I'm okay doing that, if they don't look like a crazy psycho. And I think it's always nice when a stranger offers to help. If you're on a plane, if you're somewhere in public, and I just think it's such a nice unexpected, beautiful gesture when people do that. How do you see how do you see your role as a father and the role, do you have any ideas of what gender role should be between mothers and fathers, or what is your sort of parenting philosophy?
And there's actually a lot of science on this. And if you look at all the school shootings that have ever occurred, the vast majority of them are from single parent households that are run by women. That doesn't mean that if you're a single mother by yourself with a kid, your kid's going to be a school shooter. We're still talking about an ultra minority, but we know statistically fatherhood is extremely important to the self-esteem and the life development of young children. So I think just being there is the most important thing you can do. You're going to mess it up. You're going to do it wrong. You're going to learn. You're going to get better. And if you look at your third kid versus your first kid, you would go back and raise your first kid a little bit different and make slightly different decisions. But if you're trying to do it right, you're probably pretty good. And if you're constantly saying, am I a good dad or am I a good mom? You probably are. People that don't question whether or not they're a good mom or a good dad probably aren't. Like you need that constant self-critique and how can I do better? And you should be reaching out to friends, family, and books and the internet. I think I sent you a few books probably on parenthood, didn't I? I typically do that as when I have friends that have kids. I've
Yeah,
got
some great
a
ones.
favorite reading list. But if you're not questioning, am I being a good dad? You might not be. I mean, you can still be a good dad and not question it, but the risk goes up. I think if you are constantly self-assessing and asking for help, you're probably pretty good. Um, I mean, I don't know. This is my first time being a dad. I guess when I'm a granddad, like, and that's the thing with grandparents is yes, I don't have scissors, but I think there's some over there, sweetie. Um, and being able to deal with change and stress and shield your kids from the change and stress as best you can. I don't know.
What's your approach to doing that? Obviously, life happens, life can be very stressful, personally and professionally. How do you go about shielding them from that stress while also kind of recognizing that life isn't always going to be a bubble?
Um, I think it's a very different question for a 3-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 17-year-old. Um, they deserve a specific amount of information and they don't need to be burdened with stress that they don't need to be burdened with. But you got to pick out what the age important thing of what do I need to tell them. So for me, I have several amazing friends who are great parents. Some have kids younger than mine and some have older. And I also talk, to my childhood minister that I grew up with. So if there's not an urgent thing where I have to say something right now, like if the house is on fire, that's going to stress the kids out, but we do need to get out of the house. So I'm going to tell them the house is on fire and grab what we can and we get out. I've never been forced with a house fire, but for most things, you have time to think about it and strategize on what you need to tell your children of how bad it's going on. I recently went through a divorce. I've talked to you about that. There's always stressful events going on, whether it's COVID or Trump assassination attempt. Kids are going to get exposed to stuff in the news. So you need to be on the fly at all times to how do I interpret this and how do I relate it to my children to where they can deal with the stress of what's going on in the world. You know, if there a school shooting would be, I think, especially scary for a kid that's, you know, 11 years old. So I just think, you know, be thoughtful about it, talk to friends and family and brainstorm of what's age appropriate to talk to this child about, and then reassure them and make sure that they know they have a safe place with you to talk about those things. And then if there actually is a real danger, I mean, most of Americans are scared of things that aren't going to kill them and they're ignorant of things that will kill them. So what is going to kill us is obesity and tobacco and not wearing your seatbelt. And then things like 9/11 are very scary, but they don't really kill a lot of us. It's a minority event. So you just have to take that all in and compartmentalize it and then relate that back to your kids of what are we going to do and how do we do it. So I said a lot of words and I didn't really answer the question, but it's basically group think and outsource to your mom and other good parents and be thoughtful about it and try not to stress your kids out. I think a lot of childhood anxiety is them reflecting what they see their parents going through.
Mm.
If you're going through a lot of stress, don't expose your kids to it. Like try to keep that internalized and protect them from it unless it's something they truly need to know about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that you are very pro Second Amendment. How do you navigate then, gun safety with your children? How do you talk about school shootings without, demonizing what is a constitutional right for Americans?
Um, my kids all shoot guns from time to time with me. I teach them gun safety. All of their backpacks have really good body armor put in them, and I've talked to them about if there's a school shooting that they can use that for self-defense. I'm involved in the local schools. I've taught the teachers how to use tourniquets. I've donated a lot of money to the local school system so they have first aid kits and stuff.
Mhm.
But it's a very, very small event. There's a huge amount of kids that get killed in crosswalks and a very tiny amount of kids that get killed in school shootings. But we're not trying to ban cars. We're trying to ban guns. And I'm 100% against school shootings, obviously, as is everybody. But it's a very, very public event because it's scary, but it's just not a big thing that happens at all.
Mm.
There's
Have have you always had school backpacks with armor in them? Is that something that you would recommend to other parents who have the means to do that?
it's about probably $80 to put a good piece of armor in the backpack, but that only helps if the kid has the backpack and the school shooter only shoots once. I don't know of a single instance of a child being saved with backpack armor, but for the kind of money I make as a doctor, for me to spend $200 or $300 and put armor in my kid's backpack, it gives me some justification if I did that one more step, if anything ever bad did happen.
Mm.
I don't know. Like, I mean,
If you
school
can, you
shootings are
may as
terrible.
well. Yeah. Yeah. It is a very small chance of anything happening, but if you can do anything to mitigate what could become, an unfortunate statistic, then I'm all for it. Just going into the medical field a little bit more, what do you see kids, toddlers, babies, what constitutes the most ER visits for children?
So we're talking about really minute events and scary stuff. I will say I've seen about 5 SIDS cases in my career, and that's the sudden infant death syndrome. Uh, we're looking at that now as a profession, and most of it's related to drug and alcohol abuse by the parents. And it's usually where there's an infant and somebody's taken a sleeping pill, even just a Benadryl, or they've had a few drinks and they've rolled over on their child and suffocated them. There's probably about 5% of that is channelopathy. So they've got something with the electrical part of their heart, either magnesium or sodium, where it's not working well. So it's a very rare event. I would say most pediatric stuff that comes in the ERs that I've worked at is broken bones and strep throat and general, GI illness or upper respiratory stuff. Kids are very resilient. When you look back 200 years ago, kids died all the time from very simple things, and it just doesn't happen anymore. Most people live into adulthood, and that's what has really pushed out our life expectancy, is taking the denominator out and moving us up. You don't die from simple childhood illnesses anymore, and that's good. But wear your seatbelt, don't do drugs and alcohol, and co-sleep with your kids. Put the kid in a bassinet, have them sleeping in their own child-safe crib, and it's just not going to happen.
Do you see much related to neonatal syndrome? Obviously, babies that have been exposed to drug use in the womb that have essentially a drug addiction when they come out. Do you see a lot of that where you are? And is that a growing problem that we're not really talking about in America?
I don't see it. I saw it in residency when I did my peds rotation. Um, they have a meconium drug test they do. So the first bowel movement a child has, if you have your baby in a public hospital, they take a sample of that, and if it's positive for drugs, typically Child Protective Services steps in and takes the baby or puts on other safety measures. There's a scale to measure if the kid's in withdrawals. It's not a common thing. There was a big stigma against crack babies. I'm not saying it's good to do opiates and cocaine while you're pregnant, but it doesn't at all affect the child like alcohol does. Alcohol really hurts the baby while it's developing. It's bad to be born addicted to a drug and withdraw from it, but the long-term damage is probably not on par with what happens if you're using alcohol while pregnant. And I'm grossly oversimplifying a very complicated situation, but in the ERs that I've worked in, no, I don't see that much of children in withdrawal, to answer your question.
What about you talked a little bit about obesity. What are we seeing? What are you seeing from the medical profession in terms of childhood obesity and also, the risks of a obesity in the mother as well in carrying a baby?
Also a very complex situation, but to answer you the most directly, if you look at our primaries, they're based on Iowa and corn states. And for the past, I would say 5 decades, if not longer, there's promises that are made when people are running for president that really benefit grains. And the food pyramid that's been around since World War II is a complete lie. And we all know it. And it's very easy to research that. But processed food is not good for your kids. It's not good for you as an adult. Long ago, when we were cavemen, if you were walking on a trail and you got a handful of berries, that was a reward and a special treat. And even just 100 years ago, we sometimes got candy at Christmas time and, a little bit at some other holidays. But now the amount of sugar that we eat on a daily basis is insane. So you can Google a map of the BMI average in America, and it's horrific, especially in the Southeast where I'm living now. But yeah, so the childhood obesity is a huge problem, and it's the #1 driver of metabolic syndrome and diabetes and all sorts of other comorbid conditions like obstructive sleep apnea. So we really got to back off on our sugar. And it's a complex political question because of all the sugar subsidies and corn subsidies and all the votes that are coming from the the corn belt and all the other grain. It's very complex, but we should not be subsidizing obesity. Like right now, if you get on welfare, you shouldn't be able to use your food stamps to buy Mountain Dew, but you can in America, and that's crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's eat real food, I guess, is the very
Yeah.
basic
On the
advice.
perimeter of the grocery store, you have like your cabbage and your potatoes and your meat. But then when you get in the interior, it's all processed food. And if you read the ingredients, it's a chemistry list. So if it comes in a box with a list of ingredients, it's probably not real food. Go eat the chicken legs and the sweet potatoes and the cabbage, and you'll be much better off.
Absolutely. Also, I wanted to ask you from the medical perspective, I'm reading a lot about declining, fertility rates in males. And tell me what you know about what is happening there and what impacts that has on the future of the country and what can be done to mitigate it. And I think there's always a lot of focus on female fertility, but the role of male fertility, I think, is only now just coming into purview a little bit more.
So I think you intentionally asked a one-part question, and I'm going to expand it to a two-part question. There's male fertility and then male testosterone levels. And all the food garbage that I just talked about, there's a ton of endocrine disruptors that are dropping male testosterone levels, and that has consequences for a lot of different reasons. There's good studies that the way you vote politically, uh, if your testosterone is normal or low, you're more likely to vote liberal, and if it's medium or high, you're more likely to be conservative. But there's a ton of food and plastics and all sorts of stuff that we're exposed to that drops your testosterone levels. And men are being encouraged to not engage in masculine behaviors. And there's a feedback loop. If you lift weights, your testosterone goes up, but men are being driven at a young age to not be in contact sports or taking things like Red Rover out. And do you know Red Rover?
No, explain to me what that is.
It's a childhood game where there's two people in the
Oh, I know
line.
what that one. Yeah, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Red Rover, the kid game. Yeah, yeah.
But kids should be violent up to the point of getting hurt with one another. Like you look at predators playing like baby lions or coyotes or whatever, they're rough, and you need a rough and tumble childhood. Females need this, and especially males need this, but you need to be dangerous while also in an envelope of safety and distant supervision from an adult. So the adults need to be just around the corner and aware of what you're doing while you're being dangerous. You're not going to let kids go out to Yosemite and climb El Capitan by themselves, but they need to believe at the time they're doing dangerous behavior that they are all alone, even if they're not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a different approach with your sons and than your daughters, or do you raise your kids pretty much all the same?
I think I raise them all the same, but my daughter, Katie, is the fiercest of my three. So I don't know. If I come here, Katie. Now my son's like kicking her butt. But so I don't know that
Hi,
I know that you
Katie.
can consciously in a small sample size, like three kids, say of how you're raising them. And the relationship I have with you today versus when we first met is obviously different, and it changes every time you talk. So it's you can never cross the same river twice. Every time you put your foot in it, it's a different river because it's a different body of water flowing by. Very hard to be a parent of one kid and treat them all exactly the same. Like you just can't do it. And you strive to it, and you say things like I love them all the same. You can love them all the same amount, but you do love them all differently. It's just it's each one of them is a human interaction with a different person. So I guess I'm not answering that question. I'm just saying it's complex.
I get it. Um, what I wanted to ask you a little bit about the healthcare system in America. How do you feel about it as a doctor? Do you think that what could be done to improve it, or what are some of the myths surrounding it? I just love to hear a little bit of your overview on the American healthcare system.
I think the dentist did a good job whenever Medicare came about of saying we're not going to be involved in that. We're going to do cash only. I think we need to pay the people responsible for their crimes to pay restitution. And by that, I mean, if we're going to let people make high fructose corn syrup, we should put a tax on that that covers diabetes and metabolic syndrome. And if we're going to let cigarettes exist, we should figure out what the cost to America is for COPD and lung cancer and tax cigarettes and Philip Morris and all those companies to pay for it.
Mm,
And if we did that for the top 5 diseases, we would do a lot. But it's very hard in a socialistic model to provide good care for everybody. What you ended up doing is rationing care. And it's very hard in a capitalist model to ignore the bad behavior of companies. And in America, we're both socialist and capitalist. So I think you need to blend it. But I think sin taxes on alcohol, legalize marijuana, tax it really hard, um, tax tobacco. I would do directed taxes and then dump that money back into healthcare and have free screening is what I would do to improve it.
mm. Free
And
screening
I'm one
for
guy,
what?
just your chronic conditions. There's always gonna be a kid that gets a weird genetic condition, and you see him all the time on social media where you're like, oh, this kid's born without a chromosome or
Mm,
some sort of 1 in 3,000 cancer that is just awful. So we should have a safety net for that kind of stuff. But if you're 45 and you don't work out and you eat garbage food all the time, I don't think I should have to pay for your medicine.
mm. What do you make of? I see a lot of headlines, saying that maternal mortality is something rising in America, in the only developed country where that is happening. What is your read on that? Is that correct, or is that data that's being misinterpreted?
I think it was Mark Twain. He said there's 3 types of lies. There's lies, then damn lies, and then statistics. Have you seen this quote?
Right. I'd have to look it up again, but I'm vaguely
I think it's
familiar.
Mark Twain. So there's a ton of third world countries that outscore us on maternal mortality, and it's because they don't report it. So they don't count a birth until 30 days after the child is born, and then they relate that as they have a higher mortality than us. But if you take out the first 30 days of childhood mortality, you've almost eliminated all of it. Like the kid's going to make it after that. We have a ton of babies in America that are stillborn or die within 12 hours. And it's, awful and sad, but it's something that happens. But if you never count those as being born at all, then obviously it's going to affect the data. Um, are you familiar with Ina May Gaskin? She founded midwifery in the
No, I'm
United
not.
States, and she's a close friend of mine. My daughter's named after
Thank you.
her.
I think you told me about her when I was pregnant. Right. Yeah,
Yep.
I'd still love to connect with her. I would love that.
So she was ambushed at a public speech about why is the mortality rate in pregnant women higher in women of color versus white women. And she basically said, I don't know. Um, I'm not familiar with that statistic. I would have to look at it. But what I do know is if you eat healthy and your BMI is in the normal range and you're exercising, your chance of having a healthy home birth is very, very high. In America, the number of women that are pregnant that have a high BMI is like 50%, which is scary. And you're like that big around. And I remember you asking me this question a because all pregnant women are worried about how's the birth going to go? Is it going to be okay? And I'm like, no, statistically, you're all right. You're going to be fine because you're incredibly healthy. You're a ballerina and you work out and you walk and all that. Everything's going to go fine. So the public health crisis of maternal mortality is part of the bigger obesity crisis and non-exercise crisis. We have sedentary jobs and or we don't work at all and we don't work out. There's, over half of Americans don't exercise at all. And that's insane.
Yeah, it is insane. I guess how much, what's the minimum, especially for a busy mom that has a bunch of kids, that what's the minimum kind of that we need to do?
Uh, if all you did was walk 30 minutes a day, grab your partner's hand or your dog's leash and walk 30 minutes, 5 days a week, I think that would cover an amazing improvement. In real life, what I have people that pay me to consult them on lifting weights and all that, work out 5 days a week. And there's an amazing Russian guy named Pavel. Whenever you post this video, I'll post the link in the comments. He has a plan called Greasing the Groove. And this is what I do for myself is every time my phone rings, I do some kettlebell swings. Every time I get an email, I do some squats. Every time I go to the restroom, I go do pull-ups. So all day long, I'm doing physical activity. And I think that's more of how we are historically. If you look at caveman days, you're doing small bursts of physical activity throughout the day, not going to the gym 5 days a week for an hour and doing extreme workouts. Probably not normal. As is, like, marathon running is not normal. People talk about, oh, I want to train to run a marathon. The guy that ran the first marathon died. He's a famous soldier that was trying to get important combat information to the Greeks, and then he died from it. So that's not a healthy workout. But walking, I think walking 5 days a week, 30 minutes at a time gives you 85% of what you get from training to run a marathon. Training to run a marathon sounds really unpleasant to me. I don't want to do that. But walking while holding your dog's leash or your partner's hand, that's a pleasant afternoon. Right now, I'm looking over the computer outside and it's a beautiful day. I'd like to go walk. So
Very cool. And I just wanted to sort of ask you, what are your thoughts on mental health in fatherhood? I think there's a focus in mothers, that's a growing focus, I think. Obviously, with having children, there is a lot of hormone fluctuations, there is depression, there is a lot of things, but we never really talk about the fatherhood side of it. Is that something you think? What is your thoughts? What is your advice there?
I think the cascade of hormone changes when you first have your baby is devastating to a lot of women. And we know that that's a real diagnosis. I've seen it in both the mother of my kids and a lot of my coworkers. It's hard. And beyond that, sleep deprivation is hard. With your first few months of having a baby, I've had these conversations with you. I was like, don't worry about laundry. Don't worry about housekeeping. When the baby's asleep, you should be sleeping. And when the baby's awake, fold laundry or whatever. But don't, like, some women are like, oh, I need to fold laundry, because the baby's asleep. That's not your time to catch up on housework. That's time for your own mental health care. I think the world has changed since COVID. Most of my colleagues and friends, I think, are slightly anxious and depressed. I think we've all disconnected from each other a lot. We've quit hanging out and having dinner with one another and doing communal sports events or church, and we've isolated ourselves. And there's, everybody watched Tiger King on Netflix, but did we really go have dinner after church on Wednesdays? Like that was a big thing growing up for me, is we had pancake dinners on Wednesdays and we went to church on Sundays. And a large part of America gave up on those communal events, and that degrades our mental health as a group. So I guess if I could give advice is find a workout partner, find somebody to walk with, and go to as many communal events as you can where you're talking to other humans, not just as we are Zoom, but like physically present and be there for the other people.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Always good catching up. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and I want you to go out and enjoy the nice weather because we don't have good weather here. So you're gonna enjoy it for me. It's raining. It's not nice.
Is Raven right there with you?
She is asleep next to me in her playpen, looking terribly cute. I'll send you a picture when we're offline.
Katie, come here. Oh, you can't point the camera at her?
Well, you're not really gonna see her because she is, hang on, let me shift. She is asleep on the mat. No, hang on, let me see if
Okay.
I can get her around. There we go. You see her yet?
There you
Hang on,
Ooh, that's a
hang on,
big
hang on.
playpen.
Yeah.
It
Does she
is.
enjoy the magnets?
There
Oh,
she is.
magnets.
She's taking a nap.
In school, I got to throw magnets at the wall.
All right.
Magnets?
It was fun.
It was good to see you all. Thank you for hanging out with me.
Of course.
Ah, serious. No, no.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
Take care. We'll talk soon. Bye.